Today on Inspired Money.
So the idea of newsjacking is that you find out what's going on in the news and then you create content, whether it's a blog post or a YouTube video or tweet with a hashtag or some other piece of content that's going to put your take on the news into the news cycle. That sometimes will generate media attention. You get quoted in the press. Sometimes it will generate new customers, grow your business as a result.
This is episode 56 with marketing and sales strategist, entrepreneur, advisor to emerging companies, and best-selling author of 10 books, David Meerman Scott. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker. Thanks for joining me for this special one-year anniversary show. Inspired Money is different from other personal finance podcasts because we don't want to learn how to just live with money. We want to put money and inspiration together so that we can live a richer life, make a greater impact, and together, make the world a better place. It just blows my mind how quickly 50-plus episodes have gone by. Producing this podcast weekly might be one of the most difficult things that I've done because it requires so many different skills, from booking guests, to interviewing, to editing, to promotion. I've definitely had my share of late nights. But despite the lack of sleep, I've just had a blast talking to the extraordinary guests week after week. And I feel like I've learned valuable lessons. I hope you have too. Thank you so much for listening to these conversations and being a part of this. If I've learned anything over the last 52 weeks, it's that community is so very important. To learn from each other makes me better. It makes us all better. And the better we can be with our money, that's how we make it, spend it, or give it away, is just so very important. If you can have money and can be happy and inspired, that's what we're after. That's true wealth. It's powerful, and it definitely wouldn't be the same without you. Today's show is structured a little bit differently than most. I want to share and thank congratulatory messages first. Then you'll hear a 20-minute interview with our guest. I want to get started with Jared Morris and Johnny Nastor of the Showrunner Podcast, a podcast about podcasting. That's where I've learned a lot about how to run this show. They kindly featured me in the Showrunner Podcast several weeks ago in episode 125. Here's a short clip.
Alrighty, so speaking of grizzled showrunner veterans, this week we want to shine our showrunner spotlight on another member of the Showrunner Podcasting course, the host of the Inspired Money podcast, Andy Wong. Now, Andy just released the 49th episode of his weekly show, meaning that he is on the cusp of making it through his first full year as a showrunner. Congratulations on that, Andy. And Andy hasn't made it this far by accident. He is a diligent student of podcasting and is incredibly committed to constantly improving his show for his audience, which I have learned just through my interactions with him.
Thank you so much, Jared. And Johnny, who doesn't appear in that in that clip, but it is much appreciated. If any of you are considering launching your own podcast, I highly recommend the Showrunner blog, podcast, and course. It's a great resource and super helpful. I want to share with you a message that I received from the United Kingdom. Harriet wrote, "So many podcasts about personal finance are too dry and lack actionable ideas for those imperfect beings in the real world. A great interviewer asking the questions I wanted to ask. I especially loved the episode with Linus Roach." Thank you so much, Harriet. It means a lot. I loved that episode too with Linus. It was a lot of fun learning about the craft of acting, his approach, learning about his family. I especially liked that he quoted Billie Jean King saying that pressure is a privilege. That was a real highlight moment for me. Now we've got a voice message from Harry Duran of Podcast Junkies. He interviews podcast hosts, and he has interviewed some of the biggest names in podcasting. So I am just honored and surprised to be among his illustrious guests. Here's Harry.
Hey, this is Harry Duran, host of Podcast Junkies, a podcast that Andy has been a guest on. I'm happy that we were able to connect and for him to tell his story and share it with my audience. And I just wanted to step in here for a few seconds and congratulate you on your 1-year anniversary of Inspired Money. Having been a podcaster for 4 years now, I know how much work goes into producing a show week in and week out. And I applaud you for staying consistent and providing value for your audience. So congrats again, and here's to your next 100.
Thank you, Harry, for that message and for having me on your show. If you want to hear that episode, I'll leave a link in the show notes, so check that out. A listener, Kevin, wrote, "Happy anniversary. The podcast is making a difference. 1 year and you're in the game." Thank you, Kevin. Now here's a voice message from my friend, Georgian.
Hi, Andy. Georgian Menta here from the Gratitude Podcast. What I particularly love about your podcast is the fact that you ask an interesting question, a question about the relationship that your guests have with money from a child's perspective, from their younger self's perspective. And I believe that this influences how we see money and how we relate to money much more than we realize in our day-to-day lives. And I think it's such a deep question and an interesting question to find answers to from different people. So thank you so much for this and for the work that you're doing. Keep on going. I really love your podcast and I really love what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgian, for your message and especially for supporting the Inspired Money podcast. Georgian has so generously recommended guests for my show, and every time it's always such a great guest. So thank you, Georgian. Okay, here's another listener, Lauren. She wrote, "I really like that your show is about so much more than money. It's about how to live a fulfilling life and not let money get in your way. I loved the episode, Pursuit of a Purpose-Driven Life. The guest was so inspiring, and I enjoyed hearing about her career path." Yeah, that was a fun one too. I've received several positive messages, and that guest was Tope Fajing Besi. Well, that just about wraps it up for the voice messages and emails. I want to thank each and every one of you who took the time to reach out and send me a congratulatory message. It means so much. And I just have one more message that comes from my friends at the Forgotten News podcast.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim.
Hi, my name is Kit Karen.
And we host the Forgotten News podcast.
But today, we are going to talk about the Inspired Money podcast, which is celebrating its birthday. 1 year old.
Hey, so is our show.
Wow. Does that make us twin podcasts?
Not exactly. I don't think anyone who listens to our podcast thinks of it as a resource to get financial information.
Well, did you know that $1 in 1885 is the equivalent of $26 in 2018? That's financial information. And I learned it on our show.
Yeah, but it's not very practical information.
Oh, I see what you mean. And I guess that's why people should listen to the Inspired Money podcast, so they can get practical information.
And it's also a really excellent show for anyone who would like to hear some wonderful stories about good people doing good things with their money.
I get what you're saying. It's like this. The Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. George Bernard Shaw wrote that the lack of money is the root of all evil. But the Inspired Money podcast will teach you that money doesn't have to be evil.
That's the whole thing in a nutshell. Congratulations on the first anniversary of the Inspired Money podcast.
Congratulations, and I hope the podcast has many more successful years.
Thank you, Jim and Kit, for that message. The Forgotten News podcast, those guys track down old newspaper articles in order to retell true stories from the 1800s and early 1900s. It's really cool. Thank you, everyone. Most of all, thank you. Thank you, the Inspired Moneymaker. I appreciate you tuning in to this episode, to past episodes. I cannot express to you how much it means to me that you are building this community with me and that we're doing this together. Let's keep going and keep building and keep growing so that we can truly create something bigger than ourselves. Now, let's get on with the show. Today, we're talking to David Meerman Scott. He's a marketing strategist, best-selling author of 10 books, including 3 international bestsellers. I've seen him present at least 2 keynotes. Most recently, I got to sit down with him in Hartford, Connecticut, where he was a speaker at the Impact Live conference. Some extra side notes that are not included in this interview: he was once a model and actor in Japan. He tracks all of the live concerts that he attends in a spreadsheet, which totals over 700. He co-authored a marketing book with HubSpot CEO Brian Halligan entitled Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. In this episode, you'll learn how David became a one-man media company and why you might want to do that too. Tips for better blog and social media content. And then, what is newsjacking? Find out what it is and how you can use it to reach more people that you don't already know. Now let's get inspired with David Meerman Scott. David, welcome to Inspired Money. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Andrew. Always great to be here.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
So I totally remember I was probably 7 or 8, and my mom was writing checks to pay the bills, and I couldn't understand why she didn't write a check to herself for $1 million. I didn't know where the money was coming from, and she figured out that I was curious and sat me down and kind of explained the basics of bank accounts, and light bulb goes off in my brain, and I finally sort of got a little bit of a sense of money from that.
Have you ever written yourself the check for $1 million?
I have not written myself a check for $1 million. I think the biggest check I've written, probably around $200,000. But it wasn't to myself.
Now, you've had a really diverse set of experiences, because I saw that you worked at Dean Witter Reynolds, where I actually spent a summer way back. Yeah. That was a long time ago.
So back in the days. I was on a bond trading desk, municipal bonds. Did that for a couple of years. I worked at a money broker for a couple of years. It was not quite a year, but I didn't really like it. I'm glad I did it because I learned a lot about the financial markets, got the Series 7, Series 63, all that. But then I realized I liked the information side a lot better. So I started working for a company called Wrightson, which is economic consulting, Fed watching, interest rate projections, stuff like that. And that exposure to the information side is essentially what I've now been doing for 20 years, is focused on the whole idea of information and content and creating content. And the way I look at my own business now is I look at myself as I run a media company, one-person media company.
Yeah. Given the technology and tools available today, is that how all of us should be thinking about ourselves and our businesses? We're all media companies?
I believe that it's really important. Yeah. I mean, we're doing this podcast now. Why in the world would you spend the time creating a podcast? Well, because you're a media company. And I think that any kind of organization or any kind of individual can benefit by creating the sort of content that will help people to understand who they are and maybe attract new people either through search engines or through social media.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And I've heard you talk about marketing and sales and this convergence that's taking place. People really do have to think differently about their function and even how companies operate.
I think so. Marketing and sales is converging on the web, for sure. The difference is that marketing on the web is about creating the sort of content that will be seen by many people. So right now you're creating a podcast. We're creating a podcast together, and hopefully there'll be many people who will eventually listen to this. So that's marketing. But it becomes sales when you use the exact same content to reach one person at a time. So you might say, oh, I've got a particular client that's really interested in a topic of my podcast from podcast number 41, and then you can email that to an individual existing or potential client, curating that one piece of content, and then that becomes sales, even though it's the exact same content that also serves as marketing. So I see these two things as very much converging.
You're engaged by many leading companies to speak, to give advice, to motivate sales teams and marketing teams.
Yeah, so my business model is that I give paid speaking engagements around the world and do 30 or 40 a year. I go to companies and do full-day seminars for their employees. I write books. And normally books don't make much money, but I sell a decent amount of books, so my royalties are okay. And then I also have an online training program that I sell primarily through Tony Robbins events. I speak at all of Tony Robbins' Business Mastery events. And then my final area of revenue is I serve on the advisory board of companies, including HubSpot as an example. And I don't get paid in cash, I get paid in equity. So I take equity positions for my advisory work. And I have avoided for more than 10 years the traditional consulting. It's not my thing. So I managed to earn my income by doing things other than consulting, even though I'm a one-person business.
How did you reach that point? Was that trial and error, or what's the rationale?
Well, when I first started my business was in 2002. I had been working for Thomson Reuters at the time. In the financial information business, and I got fired. I got sacked, and so I had to figure out what I was going to do. It was a tough job market. It was right after 9/11. So hey, I'll just go out my own, do a little bit of consulting, and I found, oh, this is kind of cool. You know, I can do what I want. I can work with the companies that I want to work with, and then I started creating content. That was when I went on the path of being a one-person media company. I was fortunate that I came out of the media business. Companies like Thomson Reuters and others came out of the media business, which allowed me to understand how media companies operate. And then I basically was one of the very first people in the world to understand that all companies are becoming media companies. And that's when I started to initially do consulting, but then begin writing and speaking about that idea. And just a couple of years later, I had built up enough of a following that I could start doing speaking engagements. And then in 2007, I wrote a book called The New Rules of Marketing and PR that hit the bestseller list. It sold a lot of copies. It's now in the 6th edition. And then that generated the speaking engagements because people wanted to hear the guy who wrote the book come and give speeches. So that's 11 years ago. And have been focused on the primary revenue source most years is speaking fees.
Yeah, congratulations on edition 6. And I understand translated into many languages
29
as well.
languages from Albanian to Vietnamese. And what's cool about that is because the book is in so many languages, I get invited to speak at really interesting places. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to Colombia. I've never been there. That'll be the 104th country I will have visited in my life. And then in November, I go to Romania to speak, and that will be the 105th country I will have been to. And that's actually one of the languages that the book is in. It's in Romanian. And it's surprising to me I haven't been invited to speak in Romania yet because many times because the book is in these languages, that'll drive speaking engagements from those particular countries. And I love to travel, so it's kind of cool to be able to go to those places.
Yeah, picking the languages of the countries with your favorite foods is a good way to go.
There you go. You could do it that way. I don't pick the languages. The way the business works is that a publisher in the local language decides they want to buy the rights. They buy the rights from my publisher, and then they create the local language version. So
got it.
Not much I can do to create a new language.
Okay, so you just have to have an open mind and open appetite then.
Yeah, there you go.
David, you speak a lot about how consumers are acting differently, how companies need to respond, whether our listener is a business owner or an individual. What can they learn from your experience in building your own kind of solo media company?
I think what's really important is that you need to show who you are as a person, who you are as a business person, who you are as a human being. And that's something that not very many people are willing to do. They're not very willing to put themselves out there. They're not really very willing to show vulnerability. They're not willing to show who they are outside of the business world. Maybe they have a LinkedIn, but it's all, just the facts. Here's what I've done. Here's my career path. It's basically an online resume. But what works is, number one, showing a little bit about who you are. I've got some things I really love to do. I love to go to rock concerts. So I put that on my Twitter and on my Instagram. I love to surf. I'll put that out on my social media feeds. And that gives people a chance to understand a little bit of who I am. The other thing is I showcase my expertise. And that's also something that's really important for anybody, is just to push out the content that will attract people to who you are. And you put that out for free, just provide that valuable information. Again, just like we're doing right now, you're creating another in your series of interesting podcasts, which then people will listen to, and then they'll say, oh, that guy's pretty interesting. Maybe I should consider him to help manage my money for me.
Is that something that you did right away, or is that something that you had to learn and start showing more of yourself?
I actually started with the content creation. And that was back in 2002, because I applied the ideas of understanding how publishing works to marketing. I was one of the first people to do that. But then I realized that if I'm going to write a couple of blog posts every single week, I needed to have content. I needed to figure out what I was going to write about. I had to think of what I needed to use as my subject matter. So what I found was that writing about things that were interesting to me, even if it didn't have anything to do with my business, but I could apply something from my personal life and make a business and use that as an example that we could learn something for business, worked really well. So I found that, I could talk about travel and going to an interesting place and draw a conclusion around business to that, or I could talk about surfing or rock concerts. And so that got me to put myself out there in some interesting ways. And it just went from there that I'm not shy about saying who I am.
Why do you think that it's hard for people to make that leap? That so many of us just have a LinkedIn profile that doesn't have that much information, or it just looks like a resume?
For some reason, people are led to believe that they should keep their personal life and their professional life separate. That seems to be what's accepted by most people. I don't know how people learn that. I don't know whether that's something that is taught at business school, or it's just something that people naturally think that they have to do. I'm not really sure. Or are they reluctant to put themselves out there? I'm not really sure. But clearly in the offline world, we do mix business and pleasure. We go golfing with our clients. We go out to dinner with a potential customer. When we phone someone up, we spend 5 minutes asking them about their family before we get to business. So we do put ourselves out there, but I don't know why people are reluctant to do so in the online world.
Yeah, we certainly talk about travel or what we've done recently.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I guess it's a mindset. But maybe it's because there isn't an instruction manual. This is how you should be doing social media.
Could be. I don't know. I'm not really sure the reasons, but I do know that the more you do put yourself out there, the more you show who you are, the more likely people will say, oh, wow, that sounds like someone I might want to do business with.
Now, you coined the term newsjacking, and you mentioned that you started with content, you started with blog posts, and that's, I think, traditionally more scheduled, right? It's like, I'm going to write a blog post once a week or twice a week. With newsjacking, you're really trying to take advantage of current events.
Yeah. So the idea of newsjacking is that you find out what's going on in the news and then you create content, whether it's a blog post or a YouTube video or tweet with a hashtag or some other piece of content that's going to put your take on the news into the news cycle. That sometimes will generate media attention. You get quoted in the press. Sometimes it will generate new customers, grow your business as a result. I didn't actually coin the phrase. It was originally used in the 1970s in the UK to talk about how people would steal newspapers from the curb early in the morning and then sell them. So I didn't coin the phrase, but I did popularize the phrase as it's used today around the idea of content creation. And it was kind of cool that I started talking about newsjacking back in 2010, practically every week I would write about it or speak about it. One person, me, just talking it up again and again and again, and more people started to talk about newsjacking. So much so that just in the past couple of months, it was named to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is kind of neat. And so, that just shows me that anybody can achieve that kind of success if you just create the content and push it out there.
Yeah, with technology and the tools available, there is this potential to make an impact from your little corner of the world.
Absolutely. Anybody can. And there's no question anybody can, It's great. It's a great opportunity for people.
Now, newsjacking, it seems that the key is that it's a sort of a tool or tactic that can take your area of expertise and really broadcast it to a bigger audience.
Well, what it's doing is taking your expertise at the moment people need it, because there's a news story that's breaking based on your expertise. So I'll give you an example. I used to, during every presidential election cycle, I monitor what the candidates are doing to market themselves. I study it, I blog about it, I speak about it, I do videos about it. And in 2016 presidential cycle, everybody was surprised when Donald Trump won on Election Day. Everyone had predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to win. But since I had studied the marketing of the different candidates in detail and blogged about it in detail, I recognized that Donald Trump was the most real-time candidate. He was actually doing newsjacking. He was very active on Twitter. And as a marketing technique, it was really effective. It has nothing to do with whether you supported Trump or not. It didn't have anything to do whether who I supported for president. But what it did have to do with is he was the most effective marketer. So when Donald Trump won, very surprisingly, everyone wanted to know, why the hell did he win? It wasn't expected. So I did a blog post at 4:00 in the morning. The title of the blog post was the best marketer has been elected president. And that got a ton of attention because that was the exact moment that people wanted to know, why did he win? So I got written up in all kinds of different publications, dozens of them. And then that had people invite me to come and speak to their conferences about Donald Trump's election. So that's how it works. And all of us have some area of expertise that we can do some newsjacking around.
Yeah, it's very time sensitive.
Yeah, you got to get it. You got to push it out now. Now is the time. Tomorrow is too late.
And you have to think quickly because there are instances where companies did not execute well.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you have to be careful of any news story that has a negative connotation, death, destruction. You have to be very careful of, unless you have a very distinct tie to that particular story, you should always avoid unless you have a tie to that story.
So clearly you believe that social media, having a blog, creating content presents huge opportunities to individuals, to business. What do you tell kids who are growing up today? Because they're just born with it versus I'm 46 and I have friends who still don't have a Facebook account, right? There are extremes.
Well, while it's true that I think young people have grown up with it, they don't necessarily have the understanding of how it can be used to promote a business or their career, or used to reach people they don't already know. What they're essentially grow up with is the idea of using a screen from very early age and creating content from very early age and using content to reach their friends from a very early age. Now, that's a good thing, but that's only a very small piece of the puzzle. So assuming just because you're young that you know how to use social media effectively and create content effectively, it's a myth. You still have to get a sense of how can I reach the people that will be important to me? So if you're a college student, how can you reach potential employers? Or if you're a college student, how can you reach potential graduate schools? And that's a different thing than just being on Facebook.
Yeah, it makes sense. One has to be intentional and strategic. I like to ask all of our guests, how do you define success?
Since your podcast is related to money in a loose way, I've found that for me, I have a definition of success is that I'm making more money than I need, and therefore I have the luxury to have some money to devote to interesting causes. So I'll give you just an example of one. I fly all over the world. As we're recording this, 2 weeks ago, I was in Sydney, Australia, which is a long flight. I fly in the front of the airplane, so I have an enormous carbon footprint. So I'm very conscious of the environment and my enormous carbon footprint. So I'm fortunate that I have enough money to be a partner in a 12,000-acre rainforest eco-preserve in the country of Panama, which I've been able to be fortunate enough to have enough money to buy into. And so the portion of my ownership of this rainforest way more than offsets my enormous carbon footprint. So I feel good about that. So for me, the idea of success is I'm doing well enough to be able to give back.
Yeah, make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you for sharing your story and the power of creating content. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where they can find more about you and follow you?
Sure. Twitter and Instagram, I am DM Scott, DMSCOTT. My full name, David Meerman Scott. And by the way, I use my middle name because I'm the only David Meerman Scott in the world, but there's lots and lots of David Scotts. So just Google my name. You'll find me and only me, or just go ahead and Google Newsjacking to learn a little bit more about that.
Great. Thank you, David Meerman Scott.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? I think David shared a lot of great things. First, he's a great example of someone who was laid off from his job and ended up growing his own business and brand. He's using technology to really maximize his reach and impact. 2, did you catch that he advises emerging companies not for cash, but for stock? That was a wise choice with HubSpot. I think its initial public offering price was around $25. Today, it's selling for over $154 per share. That's a big payoff. Finally, David's definition of success is a great one. Making more money than you need so that you have the luxury to have money to devote to meaningful causes. Do well enough to give back. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment or takeaway, let me know by going to inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. Let's continue the conversation there. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/056. You'll find links to our guest, things mentioned in the episode, and we're adding transcripts, so check the website for updates. Inspired Money is brought to you by fee-only advisor Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. All the music on today's show is by Jim Kimo West. Aloha, Kimo. Once again, thank you for tuning in to this special anniversary episode. Please tell a friend about Inspired Money and share your favorite episode. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so right now. It helps more people find the podcast and grow our community. Thank you for tuning in. Have an inspired week. And go out and do something that scares you.